old man lay there on the sidewalk, his expensive suit torn and muddy, a gash bleeding on his forehead. Maya froze, her hand still gripping the garbage bag she'd been dragging to the dumpster. People stepped around him, like he was just another piece of trash in this forgotten part of the city. But something about his eyes, the way they flickered open for just a second, made her drop everything and run toward him. She had no idea that kneeling down beside this stranger would change absolutely everything about her life. If stories like this one touch your heart, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to Sage Stories and hit that like button. We share true tales of kindness and hope every week, and we'd love to hear your own experiences in the comments below. Now let me tell you what happened next. Maya Chen was 19 years old and knew exactly what being invisible felt like. She worked the night shift at a rundown motel on the edge of downtown, cleaning rooms that hadn't seen a proper renovation since the 90s. During the day, she took 2 buses to community college, trying to finish a degree that felt impossibly far away. Her mom had died 3 years earlier, and the medical bills had swallowed everything they'd saved. Maya's world had shrunk to this endless cycle of work, study, sleep, repeat. That Thursday night in November started like any other. The motel manager, a heavy-set man who smelled like cigarettes and rarely looked her in the eye, told her to take out the trash from the utility room. Maya pulled on her thin jacket and hauled the bags through the side door into the alley. The cold bit through her clothes immediately. She was thinking about the statistics exam she had in 2 days, wondering if she'd have time to study when she saw him. At first she thought it was just a pile of dark clothing someone had dumped, but then she noticed the shoes. Expensive leather dress shoes that probably cost more than her entire month's rent. Her heart started pounding. She moved closer and saw him clearly. An older man, maybe in his 60s, lying motionless against the brick wall. His silver hair was matted with blood, and his face was pale in the harsh glow of the streetlight. Maya's first instinct was to run back inside and tell someone, but she knew the manager would just tell her to call the cops and get back to work. She pulled out her phone with trembling hands and dialed 911, then knelt down beside the man. His breathing was shallow but steady. She took off her jacket, barely thinking about the cold, and gently placed it under his head. That's when his eyes opened. They were a sharp gray, surprisingly alert despite everything. He looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read, confusion mixed with something that might have been gratitude. He tried to speak, but the words came out garbled. Maya leaned in closer, telling him it was okay, that help was coming, that he was going to be fine. She had no idea if that was true, but it felt like the right thing to say. The ambulance arrived within minutes. As the paramedics loaded him onto the stretcher, one of them asked if she was family. Maya shook her head, explaining she'd just found him. The paramedic looked at her jacket, now stained with the man's blood, and asked if she wanted to ride along. Something made her say yes. Maybe it was the way the old man had looked at her, or maybe it was just that she couldn't bear the thought of him being alone. At the hospital, Maya sat in the harsh fluorescent waiting room, still in her work uniform, shivering without her jacket. A nurse brought her a blanket and some terrible coffee. Hours passed. She should have been back at work, should have been finishing her shift, but she couldn't bring herself to leave. Finally, a doctor emerged and asked if she was with Robert Caldwell. The name meant nothing to her, but she nodded. The doctor explained that Robert had been mugged and left with a concussion and several broken ribs, but he was going to be okay. He was asking for her, the doctor added, looking puzzled. When Maya walked into his room, Robert was propped up against pillows, looking far more dignified than he had any right to given the circumstances. He studied her for a long moment before speaking. His voice was raspy but clear. He asked her why she'd stayed. Maya didn't have a good answer. She shrugged and said she'd wanted to make sure he was all right. Robert smiled, a sad kind of smile that suggested he wasn't used to people doing things without expecting something in return. He asked her name, where she worked, what she was studying. Maya found herself talking more than she'd talked to anyone in months. She told him about her mom, about the bills, about trying to make something of herself even though some days it felt impossible. Robert listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he told her his story. He'd built a technology company from nothing 30 years ago, sold it for millions, and spent the last decade managing investments and foundations. He had all the money anyone could want, but his wife had passed away 5 years earlier, and his only son hadn't spoken to him in over a year. after a bitter argument about the family business. He'd been walking to his car after a charity dinner when someone attacked him from behind. They'd taken his wallet, his watch, everything, and left him in that alley. But what hurt worse than the physical injuries, he said, was that dozens of people had walked past him. He'd been conscious enough to see them step over him, avoiding eye contact, treating him like he was worthless, until Maya, a young woman who had every reason to mind her own business, who was probably exhausted from work, who stopped and cared when nobody else did. Maya felt her eyes getting hot. She told him anyone would have done the same thing, but Robert shook his head firmly. They both knew that wasn't true. They'd both seen the truth in that alley. Over the next few weeks, something unexpected happened. Robert had Maya's contact information from the hospital forms, and he called to thank her properly. They started meeting for coffee. Robert was fascinated by her studies, her determination, her refusal to give up despite everything stacked against her. Maya found herself looking forward to their conversations. He never talked down to her, never made her feel small. He listened like her thoughts actually mattered. One afternoon in December, Robert asked if she'd given any thought to what she wanted to do after college. Maya admitted she'd been too focused on just surviving to think much beyond graduation. Robert nodded slowly, then asked if she'd be interested in an internship at one of his foundation offices. The position came with a salary that made Maya's head spin, enough that she could quit the motel, focus on school, maybe even move somewhere without mold in the bathroom. Maya's first reaction was to say no. It felt like charity, like pity. And she'd spent 3 years learning to stand on her own 2 feet. But Robert stopped her before she could finish the thought. He explained that he'd seen her transcript, her references from professors, the volunteer work she somehow still found time for at a local youth center. He wasn't offering her anything she hadn't earned. He was offering her the chance she deserved but hadn't been able to access because life had been unfair. Maya took the internship. She worked harder than she'd ever worked in her life, terrified of proving that Robert had made a mistake. But he hadn't. She excelled at coordinating the foundation's education programs, connecting with people in struggling communities because she understood their struggles from the inside. Within a year, Robert offered her a full-time position after graduation. Within 2 years, she was managing entire grant programs, helping hundreds of students access opportunities that had once seemed impossibly far away. But more than the career, more than the financial stability, Maya gained something she'd lost when her mom died. She gained family. Robert became like a father to her, someone who showed up for her graduation, who called on hard days, who believed in her, even when she struggled to believe in herself. And through Robert's gentle encouragement, he eventually reconciled with his own son, realizing that pride and stubbornness had cost him precious years. Robert told his son that a stranger had shown him more compassion in his lowest moment than he'd shown to the people closest to him. And that changed everything. It reminded him what actually mattered. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness create ripples we can't even imagine. Maya stopped for a stranger when no one else would, and it transformed both their lives in ways neither could have predicted. But here's what Maya would tell you if you asked her about that night. She didn't stop because she expected anything in return. She stopped because seeing someone in pain and walking away would have cost her something more valuable than money or time. It would have cost her the person she wanted to be. We all walk past people who need help. Sometimes it's literal, someone struggling on the street. Sometimes it's a coworker having a bad day, a neighbor dealing with loss, a student who's falling behind. The world tells us to keep our heads down, mind our own business, protect our time and energy. But kindness isn't a limited resource that runs out if we share it. It multiplies. It comes back in unexpected ways. It connects us to our own humanity. Maya's story reminds us that we never know the full impact of choosing compassion over convenience. That person you help today might become family, or they might not, and helping them matters just as much. Because at the end of our lives, we won't be measured by what we accumulated or how efficiently we managed our time. We'll be measured by the moments we chose to see each other, really see each other and respond with love. So here's my challenge to you. Be the person who stops. Be the person who cares when it would be easier not to. Share a story in the comments about a time someone showed you unexpected kindness, or a time you were able to help someone else. Let's remind each other that there's still so much good in this world, and we all have the power to add to it.